Gentlemen, today is August 25th, 2024, and we are here to talk about the world. Current events, foreign policy, economics, you name it, we'll talk about it in another episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith. Smith.
Hello.
Yo,
Hey, how are you?
pretty good.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear
Oh.
me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Things are working as intended. Well, I did Stormgate today. My solo honor mode run is going along. Did I talk with you about the last boss fight and how we did that?
When you were finishing the game with your friends, you talked a little bit about it, but you were kind of cagey so that you didn't spoil it for people.
Yeah. Yeah, the basic breakdown of what distinguishes the fight is it's extremely important positionally for the whole party, and the whole party has to do a lot of movement toward their goal, and it's best to ignore a lot of the hostiles in the area.
Yeah.
So we had a really nice diverse damage loadout with a bunch of slashing damage from our fighter, which was Apop's character, a bunch of bludgeoning damage, and then also radiant and a bunch of other stuff from my monk. And then the weapons that my monk had were Orin's 2 daggers, so I also had a shitload of piercing damage. So
Yeah.
the second turn when I was Potion of Speed hasted, attacking the brain, I also had poisons on my weapons, and then piercing vulnerability from using Orin's weapons. So it ended up being very, very high damage. I think it was like 200 damage in one turn.
Nice.
Yeah. So very cool fight. I'm glad that I did a bunch of research beforehand, and then also speccing all of our characters to cleric and then doing divine intervention for the consumes legit saved us. We
Pretty
were not
important.
wealthy. We got to the finish line basically broke. We used our last thieves tools in Raphael's place, and it broke, and then we didn't have one for the nether brain. So I think there was just a door we just had to give up on.
Yeah, that's what you get for not having an economist on your team.
Yeah, it's true. Well, how are you? How's the world?
I'm getting better. The cough isn't as pronounced as it was, so that's an improvement. We'll see if that holds through today's segment.
Mm-hmm.
The world's fine. I mean, it's normal, I should say. Maybe not fine, but status quo pretty much. Not a lot happened the past week, at least not of substance.
Chat, let me know and tag me if you have a particular question. But I would guess normal U.S. election shenanigans are on course. The people who like Kamala are going to still like her. The people who like Trump are still going to like Trump. I guess the question is, people who are centrist or fence sitters and kind of vote one way or the other, how they feel about the options. Because the options presented this year are relatively more different than in previous elections. There's the opportunity of the first female president, which is interesting in its own way.
Well, we've been there before. Didn't work out too well last time.
Yeah, but I feel like Hillary had so much interesting evil on her hands that it's not really a fair comparison. You're a Clinton.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, anybody in politics that long is probably going to have some skeletons in the closet. Harris has the benefit of being a bit younger and less experienced.
Yeah.
And she's still kind of a blank slate. You know, the phrase I keep saying is honeymoon period.
Well, yeah, it's before the person decides who they're going to entangle themselves with. Because
Yeah.
everybody needs to entangle themselves with someone, as in make deals with them, like do favors for them, or kind of advocate for their interests. All of that requires hustle. And if you're a politician who sticks around, you're going to definitely have some people who you schmooze with and who are giving you momentum. So we'll have to see who those are going to be. And she's kind of like very much so the Democratic Party's next in line because she was shadowing Biden pretty much. It makes the most sense. But it's not as though the Democratic Party gave people a decision of like, okay, well, there's no Biden, so who do you want instead? It's like, no, we give you the next in line.
Yeah. Yeah, not the idealist path to power, not the most ideal path to power, rather. But circumstances being what they were, not surprising. The whole Biden saying that he's going to stay and then kind of bowing out at the last possible minute, that definitely put people in a bind pretty much across the political spectrum.
Yeah, it didn't give them time to field alternative options. That's fair.
Yeah, I was really expecting more of a challenge to Harris in that regard. I figured there would be some ambitious people that would really kind of want that that position of succession to Biden, and really didn't happen. They closed ranks pretty quickly around Harris. So that was one of the big surprises for me. That was one of the reasons I didn't think she would pick her vice president before the Democratic National Convention, because I didn't think she'd pick one before her nomination was secured, and I didn't think it would be secured until the convention. But as was, ended up getting the nomination secured pretty quickly, and so she moved on and picked her VP relatively quickly in turn. Not a bad pick, just Walz is just kind of a regular backyard barbecue kind of guy. So he's a safe pick, I guess.
Yeah, but he needs, or I guess she needs that kind of counterbalance because, like, did you see the DMC stuff? Or DNC, sorry. They had Lil Jon.
Oh.
That's the intro guy. Like, seeing that in a political arena was really entertaining, especially after Hulk Hogan for Trump. It's like, wow, we've really gone full TV with our politics. It's become like wrestling. You're really trying to dazzle people to that extent and put on a show every time. And yeah, it's just pretty interesting to see this era is very much competing with normal creative media is American politics now.
I'd say politics is winning in that regard. Pretty hard to beat that right now.
Which you want to watch, another Transformers movie or the crazy shit that's going to happen to the most powerful country in the world by GDP?
Yeah. We've got a lot of Romanesque drama right now. Yeah, the conventions have definitely been leaning into entertainment, but that's a transition that's been unfolding for a couple decades now. The conventions used to be where the nominee was actually decided, right? There would be backroom dealing, and then you would see how the votes shook out, and then you would know who the nominee was. Now the nomination is settled before the convention, and the convention itself basically just serves as a multi-day infomercial for them to do advertising for the nominee. And that's why they lean into the entertainment now. That's them really trying to sell the public on their nominee. Kind of to mixed results. I listened to the DNC on the radio while I was playing BattleTech, actually.
And you heard the whole "to the windows, to the wall." It's the first song.
Yep.
So funny.
Heard that.
I'm glad that they decided to be edgy and take some risks, because that will upset certain people, which is a kind of way of responding to the no. Like, you're too politically correct. It's like, no, actually, you have stuff that you whine about as well. People complain about the other side. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
But they don't really realize that. Like, they legit feel justified and in the right about things, which is an amusing delusion that makes you feel pleasure. So that's why people have it. I'm so smart and correct. God damn.
Well, really, those choices at the DNC reflect their demographic that they're trying to target, right? They've got their core constituencies that they need to mobilize and to get fired up in order to increase the likelihood that they actually turn out to vote on election day.
True.
And so whatever their tastes are, that's what's going to be reflected in whatever circus bullshit they end up actually doing at the convention.
That would be a heckin' cool job. Politically speaking, it's like, all right, what music artists do we need to bring to the DNC to get the votes that we need to win? Recommending Lil Jon. It's a wild pick, but that's what we pick. It's like, okay, let's go. Turn down for what? I'm legit impressed. That's a crazy music video. For them to choose that, and I have the visuals of that music video. What the hell?
Well, that's, I'm guessing, the Gen X voting block that they're going for with that. I'm not super familiar with the relevant music and how old it is. But I think it's been around a while, right? Yeah. So, they're going more for Gen X now since the baby boomers are kind of aging out. They're still there, but in terms of the demographic pyramid, they're not necessarily the most important voting group now like they used to be. So that's kind of opened the door for some of the younger groups to start getting more attention from the poli-sci slash circus master role that you're talking about there, organizing these kinds of things for the DNC. Also, the Democrats' coalition among their core constituencies, in other words, includes younger people anyway. So it kind of makes sense that they would focus more on younger music. They kind of always have. But especially after the shift from Biden to Harris, it's been more pronounced. I think Harris's people, who may well be the same people that Biden was using, really want to lean in on the youth angle. I think before they didn't want to focus on it too much because, Biden was getting accused of being too old and was pretty much unable to shake a lot of those accusations. So now that they have a younger candidate, they're trying to highlight that as a major point of difference between the Republican and Democratic nominees. So the choice of music may reflect that.
Yeah. We live in silly times. It's funny to watch it.
It's especially weird. One of the things that I kind of noted watching the Democratic convention and comparing it with the Republican convention, which I also listened to on the radio, in that case while I was sick with COVID, one of the big differences I noticed is that the Democrats are kind of becoming the conservative party in the United States. And the Republican Party is becoming this sort of contrarian counterculture party almost. It seems weird to think of the Republicans as being counterculture, because counterculture has historically been associated with the left, right? And the counterculture of the 1960s, which was, of course, not conservative, right? Very much the antithesis of cultural conservatism. But at this point, a lot of the counterculture from the 60s has become more and more mainstream, to the point where if you want to be socially conservative in the United States, you're kind of a centrist counterculture guy almost. And so that's kind of pushed some of the more socially conservative elements more to the fringe and put them in a position where they're effectively dissidents now to a degree. This varies, of course, depending on where you live. Like if you're living in rural Alabama, right, that's a very different experience than living like in a major metro area, for example. But that change is notable, right? As the large metro areas have gotten larger and larger as a proportion of the population, and by extension as a proportion of voters, you can see that metropolitan politics, which tend to be socially progressive and economically more conservative, maybe more centrist in that regard, you can see that style of politics becoming more and more paramount in the overall overarching political spectrum of the United States. And so the Democrats have kind of leaned into that role as being sort of the conservators of that new normal, that new equilibrium. And they've kind of been nudged in that direction because the Republicans kind of shifted towards Trump, who was more of a radical pick and, was more the candidate of radical change. And so that created an opening in the center of American politics that the Republicans were not really reaching for anymore. And so the Democrats took advantage of that by trying to expand their coalition to encompass that center. We've talked about that at length before. And so in doing, they had really good incentive politically to kind of become the new conservative party, a kind of grand coalition that embraced what the United States had become, over the past 30, 40 years. As a result of that combination of socially progressive but economically conservative neoliberalism that sort of dominated American life through the 80s, 90s, aughts.
Yeah, so you're kind of saying that the Democratic Party now is trying to be conservative in the sense of holding the current status quo. Not conservative in the sense of being traditionalist, but of keeping stuff, conserving what's already there and not messing with it too much, which is kind of the opposite of what the Republican Party is currently at a stance to do. Like they're trying to make structural changes. You saw how the Supreme Court has been making a lot of plays.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, Trumpian populism is very much about, breaking the system, right? Trying to dominate it and subordinate it to the will of that particular movement. And I'm not your mother, right? So I'm not going to tell anybody listening like what to believe. Go do whatever you want. So make of the Trumpian populist movement what you will. But it's definitely not trying to conserve anything, really. A lot of what they want is to return to something that existed before. Make America great again is like their big slogan. But that inherently implies that that is not currently present, right? So they're the ones who want to change the status quo at this point, much more so than the Democrats do, which is not to say that they're not people, which is not to say that there are not people within the Democratic coalition that don't want to change the system. Right, there is actually, and we've talked about this before too, there is overlap between conservative Trumpian populism and progressive populism, right? And there is kind of potential there for a future coalition, kind of like there was back in the late 1800s, early 20th century, between, what would you call them? Between Southern conservatives and urban progressives. So that alliance basically formed the crux of what would be the new normal, so to speak, of early 20th century American politics, which was largely the politics of the New Deal, Democrats, Roosevelt, etc. So there is that kind of potential there, but I don't know if there's like the political will to do it, or if people are going to, or if the major leaders of those factions are going to see enough common ground to make that happen. But regardless, either of them, if they wanted to make that happen, would have to overcome that sort of new centrist conservatism, so to speak, that is represented by the current Democratic coalition that is trying to kind of will itself into power. And it's been pretty strong. It's certainly been a difficult opponent for Trumpian populism to overcome. Obviously, they won 2016. But in subsequent midterm elections and obviously in the 2020 presidential election, they've struggled a bit more. So, the Trumpian populist movement is strong and has, a lot of initiative, but it's starting to fade a little bit. I've noticed some of the supporters of the original Trump campaign in 2016 have been lamenting that Trump is becoming more and more of a conventional sort of party guy. That is to say, Republican type guy, establishment Republican, rather than sort of the radical actor that he used to be. And so he's lost some thunder because of that. And as a result, he's kind of been shifting gears to lean more into the evangelical vote, the socially conservative vote, because he was able to significantly impress them with some of the achievements that he made as a result of appointing the Supreme Court justices. Of course, overturning Roe v. Wade, for example, was like a really big win for the evangelical voter in the United States.
I never thought about that, yeah. Like, he did give them something that they clearly wanted, even if I would say he's not a true Christian in any sense with how he behaves and how he postures and leads and so on. But if he creates changes in the political system that the, quote, real Christians like, then he's still someone who's like an anti-hero to them. They don't necessarily agree with everything about what he does, but he gives them results, and that's an alliance.
That's a really good way of putting it. I've never thought of Trump as an anti-hero before, but that actually does fairly accurately describe that relationship.
To some people he is, because he has a lot of personality, he has a lot of ability to steer people with charisma, and he'll kind of say whatever he needs to win, which makes him a very flexible character on the political landscape. A lot of people won't take as many risks as he will. So, yeah, it's a interesting style.
Yeah, so I find it, that style has definitely served him well, but one of the problems with that style is that it's not very strategic. And I think people liked the off-the-cuff style sort of back in 2016 and maybe in the years after, but I think it's starting to wear a little thin, especially since a lot of his most excited supporters back in the day have noted that he hasn't been able to actually achieve much of substance. His original supporters were radical conservatives, and also disaffected labor guys who had previously supported Democrats but switched because they didn't think they were a pro-worker party anymore. So, that was a decisive combination for Trump back in 2016. But one of the criticisms I've made of Trump before is that he didn't really do anything while in office that any given Republican president would not have done, right? So he wasn't actually much of a radical actor in that regard. Most of the stuff he did that a normal Republican president, quote unquote, would not have done was largely just theatrics that ended up getting shot down in court or otherwise stopped, by administrative resistance or bureaucratic resistance, or largely was just superficial bullshit to begin with. A lot of the drama of Trump's first term was largely in the stuff that he might do. That was what everybody was talking about, or at least everybody I was paying attention to. Trump could do this. Trump might do this. This could be a constitutional crisis. This could be the big moment when Trump breaks the civil service. There were a lot of conversations like that back in the day, and his core supporters were actually quite excited about that because that's exactly what they wanted him to do. But then that didn't really happen, right? And there's been some talk that it could happen in a second term because, this, that, or the other factor. For example, he'll have people who are much more loyal and supportive of his agenda in his administration if he wins again. So he could be more dangerous and more likely to do all the stuff that people were worried he might do in his first term. But that's all just speculation. And at this point, some of the core supporters that were excited about him in 16 are kind of worn out. They don't really trust him anymore. And so that's put him at something of a disadvantage. A lot of people who like him are still going to vote for him anyway, regardless, because they just hate Democrats that much. That's probably the Republicans' biggest tool, is so many people in the United States just hate Democrats and progressives in particular. But Trump's star is starting to fade a little bit in that regard. He's just kind of getting older. And, like a lot of autocratic type figures, he's not really laying the groundwork for succession. He thinks implicitly that he's going to be around forever. There is no after Trump because Trump is forever. You see the same behavior with a lot of powerful figures around the world. So Trump seems to fit that playbook. And I also note that Trump really has not taken advantage of the opportunity to kind of paint Harris. And to be fair, Harris has been kind of in a defensive crouch since her nomination was secured. She has not really come out and done a lot of substantive public policy stuff, right? That's been one of the big knocks against her. She hasn't really talked to the press. She hasn't done any press conferences. She doesn't really take questions. So there's the sense that she's kind of avoiding the press. And, some Republican critics have been quick to highlight that. But it's also kind of been working for her. It also acts as a kind of insulation to the normal sort of process of opponents kind of tearing you apart based off of what you say and the substance of what you're proposing to do. She's kind of avoided that. So whether the public punishes her or not is going to determine whether that strategy is worthwhile. For the moment, it seems to be working because the Republicans, and especially Trump, have not really been able to take advantage of it. I had assumed that one of the reasons the Democrats would not drop Biden and embrace Harris is that if they did drop Biden at the last minute and then go with somebody like Harris, especially Harris, then she would be such a blank slate that would be able to just completely manipulate the public into thinking she was some kind of monster. American parties are very good at doing that. They're very experienced. So I didn't think Harris would be a great pick for that reason. But much to my surprise, the Republican Party has not really mobilized very quickly to do that. And in so much as they haven't been very effective. And part of that is just to do with Trump, because Trump has been very much hyper-focused on just personal insults. He has this famous style, right, where he just kind of shit talks his opponent on a personal level, but there hasn't really been a kind of broader critique that might appeal to a broader range of perspectives, ideologies, and whatnot on the right wing of the American political spectrum. And so, for those reasons, Harris has been able to kind of enjoy an extended honeymoon period, where the bump she saw in polls after her nomination was effectively secured has actually kind of stuck around for a while. I'm still pretty skeptical that's going to last. Sooner or later, she's going to fuck something up, right? Everybody does. That's just normal in a presidential campaign. And it could be that at that point, the GOP is able to kind of get back on its feet and get some of its previous momentum back. But for now, it kind of feels like they're on their heels a little bit. I don't think they entirely know how to deal with this situation. But we'll see how long that lasts. That's definitely going to be a big factor in the outcome of the election, which is rapidly approaching now. We're only, 4 months away? Actually, less than that. Yeah, 2 months, about 3 months. So politically speaking, that's forever. Like, a lot can happen in 3 months. We're nowhere near done with this. But, you can see the clock counting down now. We're getting closer and closer. And I remind everybody, especially those of you not familiar with American politics, in particular those of you not from the United States, what happens in presidential elections in the United States, if not, big elections in general in the United States, is that politicians running for office will generally save their most impactful criticisms or perhaps propaganda that they have for their opponent for right before the election. Because most people are generally not that tuned into politics. And the result is that a lot of people who end up voting in American elections actually don't really start paying too much attention to politics until like a week before the vote happens, maybe a month or so. So what politicians and parties have figured out is that their biggest criticisms, their most substantive criticisms, or perhaps their most compromising lies, as it were, are the most impactful if they're released maybe 2 weeks to a month before Election Day. So as much fireworks as we've already seen in this presidential election, you're not going to see the biggest fireworks until October. They even have a name for it, October Surprise. So we're going to have, I'm sure, quite a few October surprises this year. So that's when the real drama will probably happen.
That's funny. The timing of when you throw the dirt.
It matters. It actually does matter. Campaign advisors strategize around that.
It's interesting that we have two options that are using opposite styles. Trump plays pretty much as loud as possible, so you can't even remember like all the shit he's done because he just did something new today. Mm-hmm. Whereas Kamala Harris is basically being invisible as much as possible.
Yeah.
So you don't make any mistake. If you don't step on anything, any key topic, and offend anybody, then nobody dislikes you.
Yeah.
But if you don't take any stances, then you're not defined by people, so they don't really feel enthusiastic about you. She's in a unique spot right now because she got in because of Biden stepping out. It wasn't as though she debated other candidates and convinced the public that she was the best front runner.
Yeah, and a lot of that, again, just comes down to Trump. He doesn't really lean into ideas so much, but rather himself, right? He is sort of the product that they're selling rather than a set of ideas. And that can work if people are sufficiently disenchanted with the establishment, which is why he was able to win in 2016. But the downside is that by doing that, you make it really easy for your opponents to run against you because they can just basically say, well, we're not that. We're the anti-Trump. And we're going to be a coalition of all the people that want to vote for anti-Trump. So, you can actually play your cards pretty conservatively in that kind of situation and do pretty well and be competitive. And that's effectively what the Democrats are doing. If Trump ever leaves the scene or maybe actually does evolve his movement into something beyond himself and into an actual coherent catalog of interrelated ideas and concepts, maybe even an ideology, in that case, you would see things transform more and you would see more politics based on ideas, which is what we nominally used to have in the United States before the whole populist moment hit us. But for now, we're kind of in a transitory period. And I think we've talked before about that. Economically, politically, socially, the United States is in a big transition right now. We're moving from one equilibrium to another. And we haven't made it to the new equilibrium yet. So everything feels very fluid, chaotic, unpredictable. Precedent doesn't really matter because everything is unprecedented. We can't predict or forecast anything with any great confidence or accuracy. So there's just an immense amount of uncertainty. You can actually see that if you follow elite institutions in particular, because like even they don't know what to do or what the fuck is going on. They would never admit that because, of course, when you're guardian of castle, right? When you're the paragon of power and responsible for governance, you can't really show that kind of weakness. But if you know how to read elite language, right? If you know how to speak economics, if you know how to speak public policy, you can see a lot of elite actors hedging their bets with the way that they act, both politically and in terms of the policy that they administrate and pass. So until we reach something resembling a status quo with more certainty, that's going to continue to be the case, and we're going to have weird stuff happening. That's just sort of the nature of the moment right now.
Best of luck, United States. We need it. How much, I would say, do you think these candidates would really shift American policy in the world? Because Trump talks a big game, but during his time, it wasn't a super crazy run. I think you could say. He didn't really make major sweeping changes. I guess you mentioned the Roe v. Wade. Some people would consider that a major change. But aside from that,
probably the two biggest changes that Trump wrought, or maybe achieved, depending on how you want to frame it, while he was president, was the one you just mentioned, and then trade policy. Like, Trump very decisively moved towards a more protectionist trade policy. I would point out that the WTO... Huh?
As in tariff the shit out of people?
Yeah.
Tariff.
But, he also hobbled the WTO. There was a whole dispute resolution mechanism that the WTO used to try to resolve disputes, trade disputes between its members. And what the Trump administration did is it started blocking the appointment of judges to the arbitration council that is responsible for overseeing those disputes, to the point where it basically just couldn't do it anymore. And the Biden administration actually has continued to do that. Because the Biden administration basically just took Trump's trade policy and continued it for the most part. They tried to manage it a little more professionally and strategically, but the broad contours are still pretty much the same. Like, in general, they're very skeptical about trade with China. And they've tried to implement, what do they call it? A small yard, tall fence trade policy for China. We can get more into the details of that if somebody wants to. But that's basically their version of what was Trump's policy. So, yeah, that was a big change. There had kind of been a deadlock in Washington policy-wise about trade policy, specifically with regard to China, because everybody kind of knew trade with China was very, how should I put this, unfair, tilted? That's not quite the word I want. Unbalanced, let's say. It leaned heavily in China's favor. But also, everybody was kind of afraid of pissing off corporate America because, of course, corporate America made shit tons of money with that status quo. So there was kind of a sense that something needed to be done, but nobody felt that they could do about it or felt that it would be better just to do it later, and so nothing got done. So say what you will about the Trump administration, they did at least achieve that. They broke that deadlock, and now we have a new status quo in terms of trade policy. So yeah, those were the two big changes. There was some substance there, for sure.
Yeah, fun fact that's related to why the company that my gamer chair is made of went out of business. They specifically used, I think, raw material goods from China that became no longer worth it and viable as a business model.
Tough break. Should have bought from Vietnam instead. A lot of Chinese companies started setting up factories in Vietnam and other places in Southeast Asia to get around American tariffs, rather. Just basic first-degree tariff evasion, and very successful. It's been very successful. So I didn't mean to interrupt. What you were saying something about what did Trump achieve? So
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
were,
Like I'm asking uh, how much these politicians who are going for president are going
Mhm.
to actively
Oh,
try to change stuff compared
right.
to other ones that might have a more clear agenda. Because you said that we don't really know what policies Harris really wants to prioritize. She didn't really talk about it as much.
Yeah.
So it's like for the voter, is she going to be pretty status quo or does she have plans? I guess that's the question mark we don't know the answer to.
Yeah, I mean, the real answer is I don't know. Nobody really knows. I mean, she could go batshit crazy
Mm-hmm.
when she becomes president. She could become drunk with power, for all we know.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to guess, and this is again pure speculation on my part, my guess is that if she did win the presidency, she would probably keep the same team that Biden has, broadly speaking, because she's already in the administration. Those are the people she's been networking with. Those are the people she knows. So probably her administration's staff would probably much resemble the staff under the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm.
So voting for Harris, you're probably going to get public policy that is pretty similar to what we have under Biden, which may be good or bad, depending on if you like what he's been doing. But again, her principal selling point is going to be I'm not Trump, right? I'm not going to be the guy who threatens the constitutional order or otherwise, disregards institutional norms of one kind or another. She's the establishment, and I would argue, conservative candidate. And Trump is the radical sort of reformer. I hesitate to call Trump a reformer because it doesn't really feel like he wants to reform the system so much as just take control of it for his own purposes. But maybe I'm too subjective on that. I certainly welcome criticism on here, but that's my impression. But regardless, that is how he's seen by many of his supporters: an outsider, a reformer, somebody who wants to shake up the system, etc. So that is increasingly the dichotomy. Like if you want the status quo, Harris is your person. She's probably not going to deviate too much from what we've already seen under Biden. But if you do want to shake things up, for whatever reason, then Trump certainly promises to do that. Whether or not he actually does it, anybody's guess. Personally, again, I think he's too transactional in style to really shake things up. Again, I think he just sees himself as being like not a challenger of establishment politics, but rather just somebody who can do it even better than the people who came before him. Because he thinks he knows how it works. He thinks being a big boss, like being a patron, is how it works. And so that's more what he is trying to do. And that certainly does have a role in American politics. Like patronage never fully went away. There's certainly corrupt areas of the country and its and of its various regional politics. New Jersey consistently delivers on that count. Like it all seems like New Jersey politics in particular seems to produce a lot of headline cases of political corruption, especially at the national level. But that's sort of those are what your choices are, right? Harris will probably be the establishment status quo choice, but I don't really know what she's going to do. Trump promises to shake things up, but I don't know what he's going to do. So, it's a weird status quo. And again, I just think that's a symptom of being in this transitional period, right? We don't really have solid demarcation lines between the major political coalitions as of yet. We may get there at one point, but we seem a ways off at this juncture.
Will these candidates fit with the usual Democrats raise taxes for people, Republicans lower them? Have they talked about that?
Probably. I don't think. Well, Trump has said that he wants to extend the tax cuts that he passed, or that his administration, helped pass. Back in, I want to say 2017, I think is when they did that. Mm-hmm. That was a big corporate tax cut, but they also gave tax cuts to a bunch of other people, but it's set to expire, I think, like next year or something. So he's said that he wants to extend that. However, Harris's campaign says that they don't want to extend the corporate tax cuts, but they do want to extend the tax cuts that were part of that bill that pertain to the middle class. Yeah, there's been one of the interesting aspects of the way that American politics has evolved over the past 10 years is just how much that the populist movement has actually managed to shift the center of American politics. I think we've talked about this before too. But in this case, like, there is kind of a broad sense that the government should spend more money, either directly or implicitly through tax cuts, to help the working man. And so both Trump and his opponents have kind of increasingly focused on that. So both Trump and Harris promised to help the middle class with tax cuts. In Trump's case, he also wants to throw in corporate tax cuts. In Harris's case, she doesn't want to do that. But otherwise, there's actually overlap between them in terms of how that policy is going to influence, rather, how that policy is going to actually impact the broader part of the population, since, you know, most people are not corporations. You can also see that overlap occurring in things like foreign policy. You know, Trump famously is very skeptical of alliances, NATO, et cetera, but he's also very much against getting involved in foreign wars. You know, there's some inconsistency as far as his Iran policy in that regard, but that's a whole nother conversation. You know, regardless, he is kind of seen as being more of an anti-war Republican style candidate. You know, that's part of his overarching isolationism. But Harris also kind of advocates that. Obviously, she advocates supporting American allies, being engaged in the world, et cetera, et cetera. But she's also opposing sort of dumb wars, basically. That's the standard. That's been a standard part of the Democratic campaign platform for a while now, basically since the Iraq War. So, you know, again, more overlap. Like, all of these things that had previously been considered like more populist, almost lefty style politics, like they were back in 2006, now those are increasingly consensus issues. And a lot of that, again, is just the result of Trump shifting the political spectrum. So, you know, even if he loses, like, even if he just loses and then disappears from politics after this election, like, his legacy, that is going to be his legacy more than anything. That shift, and then the two things he did while he was president.
I do believe we have at least a question. Fuzzy Code has passed one along.
Oh, I'll check it out. Let's see. Where is it? Agent Smith. Oh, what's her positions on foreign policy? She hasn't, you know, like with a lot of things, she hasn't been super specific. Basically, not Trump. Part of her foreign policy is just not Trump. Again, supporting NATO, supporting Ukraine, staying involved in the Indo-Pacific, as the Pentagon increasingly calls it. Basically, just like South Asia plus East Asia, and then Southeast Asia as well, to a degree. Basically, it's China. You know, they're worried about China, so they want to really dial in strategically on all of the areas around China that are the most relevant to the United States. So Japan, Korean Peninsula, Taiwan, India are the main ones. But they also want to kind of rope in Southeast Asia, because the more allies you have in the region, the more leverage you have to bring to bear against China if it ever decides to get super aggressive. Not a lot of takers thus far, but, well, that's a whole conversation. If somebody wants to talk about the politics of Sino-American competition in Southeast Asia, feel free to ask, and we can get into it. But that's a whole conversation unto itself. But as far as Kamala's policy there, like, she wants to maintain that, right? She wants to just continue being engaged in the region and to try to both expand America's military power in the region and also its economic ties to the region in order to counterbalance China. Now, Trump also kind of wants to do that stuff. You know, there's overlap there. He's famously much more hawkish on China than he is on Russia, for example. So that's not necessarily a distinguishing point. But Trump has said that he's very skeptical about NATO. You know, he thinks they're all free riding and wants them to pay their bills, as he says, which, you know, doesn't really make sense. That's not how it works, but it's a whole other topic. He's skeptical of NATO, and then, of course, he doesn't really want to continue helping Ukraine. he's kind of been cagey on Ukraine. Like, I don't think he's ever like full on said that he wants to just end all support to Ukraine and then just do nothing about it. I think when he's been asked about it, he said that if he had been president, it never would have happened in the first place, which, you know, is a lovely concept, you know, an impossible counterfactual, but also doesn't really represent a policy for how to deal with the situation as it is now. So I've never really seen him propose a plan in that regard. I think in so much as he has, he's mostly just done what he kind of always does with complicated policy questions, which is to just say he'll fix it if he's elected. If I'm elected, then I'll have peace between Ukraine and Russia rapidly, you know. So I have no idea how he would do that, but that seems to be his belief, or his assertion anyway, that he would be able to if given the chance. So skepticism of Europe, probably more status quo-y in the Far East is how I would describe Trump's foreign policy. And of course, on trade, he's pretty skeptical about that. So that would probably impact relations with a lot of developing countries. But I also don't know how much of that he would actually follow through with. So Harris, by contrast, is similar in so much as China is concerned, but as far as Europe and trade goes, much more of a traditional status quo candidate. Again, I would go back to conservative. You know, conservative for like 2024. Like, she wants to do what the United States has been doing as far as its foreign relations with its allies, at least. Europe, to a lesser degree, the Middle East maybe, and then East Asia for the past 50 years, right? The United States has been a major guarantor of security in all three regions, and so she broadly wants to continue doing that. I don't know that she wants to get super involved in the Middle East. I'm pretty sure every politician in the United States is very risk averse now with regard to involvement in Middle Eastern conflicts. But, you know, the way Israel and Palestine go, it's kind of hard to avoid that. I think on that count, Trump is very, very pro-Israel, famously so. But he also doesn't really want to get dragged into a major conflict, especially with Iran, which is what Netanyahu sometimes seems to want the United States to do for him. Very risk averse as far as that goes. You know, Trump was not afraid to assassinate Soleimani, for example. So, you know, he was hawkish in that particular incident, but I also noted that they kind of talked things down pretty quickly after that. So superficial shows of force kind of masking a more conservative, risk averse foreign policy in the Middle East. And I think Harris would be pretty broadly similar to that. Obviously, she's more skeptical of Israel, probably less likely to do superficial bullshit like, you know, with Trump moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem out of Tel Aviv and recognizing some settlements as legal. Like, Harris is not going to do stuff like that. But she's also said that she wants to ensure that Israel's right to protect itself is respected. So that's kind of a status quo position for many American governments now, going back decades. So she's still going to be, her foreign policy in the Middle East is going to be present, but not necessarily involved to the point of, you know, invading Iraq or getting into a confrontation with Iran. You know, that kind of stuff is going to be avoided, I imagine, in both a Harris and a Trump administration. But how they deal with it will be different. You know, Trump is going to be more of a tough guy, try to show off, and then Harris probably will try to do what Obama and Biden did, which was to try to do more engagement, try to talk things out through negotiations that just kind of run on interminably and never really result in anything.
Kabuki theater.
Yeah, always a lot of that in foreign policy. But again, she's been pretty skimpy on details, so I can't really say for certain just what she would do. I think her advisors, from what I've read on foreign policy, I should say, her foreign policy advisors, from what I've read, are, what do they call them? Restrainers. There's been a debate, rather, in the foreign policy establishment, both inside the government and outside the government, about how to use American power. And that conversation largely came out of the mixed success, shall we say, of the war on terror and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan in particular. And some people wanted the United States to continue to try to lead, quote unquote, you know, to have a forward position, to continue to be aggressive, either in terms of kind of a realist foreign policy in which the United States throws its weight around in order to maintain its leadership position in the world, or alternatively, to continue to maintain a strong position in foreign policy around the world, but more from a humanitarian perspective. Sort of that's the Samantha Power position, that the United States should use its power actively in world affairs, but should do so judiciously in order to maximize the global public good, as opposed to the realist perspective, which is to just narrowly focus on American interests. However broadly those may be defined, that's kind of always been a weak point for realist foreign policy. So that was one side of the debate, and then on the other side were the restrainers, who believed that the United States needed to exercise its power in a much more restrained way, hence the name restrainer. They believe that the United States should not be actively getting involved in conflicts, whether for humanitarian reasons or otherwise. You know, their belief was that wars were overly destructive, too unpredictable, and that it would be better for the United States to pursue its interests abroad in ways that were more circumspect and indirect. You know, use those levers of power which are not kinetic in nature. Although they still believe the kinetic aspect has its, worth, right? They're not saying that the United States needs to disarm. They're not even saying the United States needs to pull out of the Middle East. You know, they believe the United States should be present in all of the traditional regions of import around the world. They just think that the previous 20 years of American foreign policy involvement in those regions, the Middle East in particular, has been a disaster, and that a radical change in how America strategizes in those regions is paramount in order for the United States to remain successful in pursuing its to remain successful in pursuing its interests in those regions. So Biden himself was more of a restrainer during the Obama administration, but he wasn't really able to get his way. President Obama, rather, in the Obama administration, ended up kind of splitting the difference, King Solomon style, between the restrainers and those that wanted a more forward American policy. I think Obama himself wanted to end the wars, Afghanistan and Iraq in particular, but found himself kind of bound by military advisors and public opinion, and also just attacks by the Republican Party, which tried to paint him as weak on security. So the result is that instead of just pulling out completely, he started planning for an eventual withdrawal, which got him in trouble in Afghanistan famously. That was when he said that, we're going to stay in Afghanistan for a couple more years, but then we're going to definitely withdraw by, such and such date. Having a fixed date of withdrawal was seen as pretty stupid, because it basically told the Taliban, like, hey, we're going to go hard on you for a while, but if you just kind of sit tight in the background and don't do anything for a couple years, then we're going to leave regardless.
You have this long until you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. So that was one of the Obama administration's solutions to that debate. The other one was to shift away from counterinsurgency to counterterrorism, which I think was a smart move at the time. I think obviously getting out probably would have been more judicious, especially given what we know happened later. But at the time, the counterinsurgency lobby, so to speak, within the bureaucratic establishment in Washington was pretty powerful. And going against them kind of ran against the grain, politically and administratively speaking. So the way he was able to kind of make that transition successfully was impressive, right? By focusing on counterterrorism, you could sort of deflect accusations that you were just giving up. Instead, you could just paint it as a change in strategy. And to a degree, it was a legitimate change in strategy. But again, I think the Obama administration there was actively not just trying to change strategy, but also to defeat what it saw as the major administrative block to actually achieving withdrawal eventually. Because again, the coin guys, the counterinsurgency guys, were saying, we just need a couple more years, we need a couple more $1 billion, we need a couple thousand more troops, we need this, we need that. And it was dragging out the war interminably, and there was no clear endpoint. There was no clear victory condition. Like, it was just one of those, it was Vietnam, basically. Like, they were just stuck, politically and administratively, like on the political side and on the administrative side, especially in the military, like there was a deadlock and nobody could really figure out how to fix it. So getting rid, or at least weakening, the coin faction in the military was an important step in that direction. And eventually it did open the door to reducing the American presence on the ground, which allowed eventually for Trump and then later Biden to start actually substantively planning withdrawal. So that was an administrative battle more than a political or military battle, but it was actually an important one, maybe the most important one, to actually achieving an end to the conflict. So I do give Obama credit for that. I recognize that people give him a lot of shit, perhaps rightfully so, for the counterterrorism shift resulting in a significant increase in the use of drone attacks. People gave him, people were very critical of him for that. He was supposed to end the wars, and instead, drone assassinations became de rigueur. But I recognize that is substantive. That is a substantive point of criticism, but at the same time, knowing the context about that bureaucratic battle going on between Coyne and the counterterrorism crowd, I think that was a worthwhile trade-off, even if the drone strikes didn't really achieve all that much in terms of actually progressing American interests. I think in so much as withdrawal was the ultimate end goal, the ultimate desirable American interest in Afghanistan, shifting towards counterterrorism and the drone strikes were the cost of doing that. And in so much as that was the case, it was worthwhile.
I think most people would prefer that stance to boots on the ground, but it's definitely not the pacifist stance.
Yeah, that was how it was painted at the time, right? Like, we can either do this, we can do the drone strikes, we can have a bigger role for intelligence agencies, we can do assassinations, or we can just do counterinsurgency for another 20 years and chase our tails the whole time. So within the administration, made a lot of sense, and it did open the door for further de-escalation later. But at the time, it was seen as a betrayal, because all the people that voted for him, of course, were voting for withdrawal, right? They wanted an end to the conflict, and it just wasn't viable at that time. And they saw the drone strikes then as being just more of the same, right? Just basically the government lying about its involvement and its desire to stay in Afghanistan. And that's a knock that's kind of stuck with him over time, especially with the anti-war crowd.
Yeah, that's one of the tricky things about stepping into the role of president is you jump in front of a organization that has tendrils all over the planet and is a very dominant entity whenever it fights stuff. So its capacity to project force is very high, so you have to be careful about managing that, but you also will have some people who dislike you for being in that position.
Yeah.
Or they dislike you for other reasons, and you do have to kind of get your hands dirty in a sense because the country's hands are dirty all the time.
Yeah, Trump kind of learned that the hard way. He kept trying to get the United States out of Syria, and the military kept telling him, well, we can do that, but then there'll be these problems, there'll be that problem, et cetera. And they kind of slow walked it until eventually he kind of changed his mind, or, well, left office eventually. If you could delay long enough, then you can just kind of wait them out and maybe get somebody more favorable. I don't know how many people from outside the United States remember Jimmy Carter. He was president of the United States in the late 70s. He was very much a reformist candidate. He was the guy that won election after Nixon was impeached and then later resigned. So, the country was pretty upset at the Republican Party and establishment politics in general. So Jimmy Carter was like the big reformer that they voted for. And he actually tried to get the United States to withdraw from South Korea. He even went so far as to issue an order to that effect. And the only reason it didn't happen is because the security establishment said, well, let us do a study first in order to make sure that we have all our T's crossed and can predict what's going to happen and can kind of war game everything out in order to mitigate any risks. And that study took several years, as it happens. And by the time they got anywhere near finishing, not only had the Carter administration basically moved on from the issue, but they were running for re-election. So obviously they had bigger fish to fry. And Reagan beat him, of course, and so then that was that. There was no more talk about withdrawing from South Korea. How did I get on to the Obama administration? Oh, I was talking about restrainers, right? So what is going to define Harris's foreign policy? So probably similar to Biden, and Biden was very much a restrainer his whole career. Well, I mean, especially during the war on terror, specifically. In the Obama administration, he was a restrainer. He wanted to get out of Afghanistan, out of Iraq. Obama was of a like mind, but for political reasons, he wasn't able to kind of fully follow through with that for the reasons that we just discussed. But when Biden became president, he was able to actually act on those restrainer instincts. And that's actually a big part of why he decided to just withdraw from Afghanistan. That had been what he'd wanted to do for a long time. And his foreign policy team backed him on that. They were largely of like mind. Obviously, they wished it had gone better. It was not especially well executed. But their instinct was that the war had dragged on too long and that it didn't have any real endpoint, and that it would be better to just cut the nation's losses and get out while they could, which they eventually did. And Trump was kind of trying to do that, so maybe that's another example of overlap in terms of foreign policy objectives. If he'd actually been reelected, maybe he would have. Who's to say? But also maybe not, just depending on the context and circumstances on the ground. But regardless, the same advisors, the same restrainer logic that sort of drove Biden's decision-making in that case, as well as in American foreign policy generally, are probably also going to be very influential, if not just outright define Harris's administration if she's elected. So that's my best guess as far as Kamala Harris's position on foreign policy. And I guess I talked a lot about Trump's foreign policy there as well, just as point of contrast. But I hope that kind of answers that question to their satisfaction.
Also, if we get anything wrong or something about a certain area, feel free to weigh in. It's meant to be a discussion.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on everything I talk about on here. I'm more painfully obvious sometimes than others. So if I ever say anything wrong, stupid, or biased, let me know. If I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. So participation by chat is encouraged in that regard. I don't always read chat I don't read chat while we do this because I can't walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. But I will go and read it later. So I do see all the feedback and I do enjoy it. Oh, by the way, did you see the new Alien movie?
I did not. I saw the trailer for it.
I was going to ask if it was any good.
Mm-hmm.
I've always liked the aesthetics of the Alien movies, even when the movies themselves were kind of bad. I always appreciated the work that went into the practical effects, and especially all of the scenes involving spaceships. The Alien franchise has some of the best spaceship porn in sci-fi, so I always loved that. Alien Covenant was not a great movie, but it was a very pretty movie.
Yeah, I think I remember disliking Prometheus because it seemed like the characters were very petty and immature and unskilled. I kind of would like to see more capable, strong characters deal with these situations and kind of see how it shakes out. But they do have more action movie content with the Alien franchise. Like Alien versus Predator stuff is a lot more of the cool monster fights, whereas I think this one's more of the gore and the horror side of Alien.
Yeah, they wanted to go back to the horror origin of the franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard of Evil Dead?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple years ago, I guess more than a couple years ago now, they actually did a reboot of the original movie. And it was pretty well received. Apparently, even the fans liked it. I haven't watched it myself yet, but the fact that it was well received with the fans, I took as a pretty good sign. So the director of that reboot is actually the guy that got to direct the new Alien movie.
Mm.
So I kind of get the sense they're trying to do something similar, where it's kind of like a soft reboot. It's not a full reboot, because technically I think the movie does take place within the continuity of the established Alien universe. Mm-hmm. But stylistically, like you say, like it's more of a traditional horror movie, right? In the style of the first movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if anybody listening has seen it, but let us know if it's any good.
Do you like Alien better or Predator better?
Those are radically... Well, I mean, are we talking about the franchises or the movies? Like the movie Predator versus the movie Alien, or the franchises?
Franchises.
Franchise. Okay. They're so radically different, though.
Yeah.
That's the trouble, right? It's almost an apples and oranges comparison. Like Predator is very much that's very much a guy's franchise. You know, that's about like big buff aliens beating the shit out of both each other and humans.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with Alien, like there's a lot of more feminine there are more feminine aspects to the themes of the franchise. Like the design of the alien itself has undertones of like rape, right? That was sort of one of the original themes that they wanted to inject in the original movie. And they've actually continued that throughout the franchise. So that's one of the underlying themes there. You know, the whole forcible impregnation thing, and then the alien, you know, bursting out of your chest, that whole thing. So it's kind of like a softer, gentler, but more horrific iteration of sci-fi action / horror. So, you know, in that sense, they're kind of like fundamentally different styles of both movie making and franchising. But that said, I think Alien has been the more successful franchise, which is not really saying that much considering some of the more recent entries in the franchise. But yeah, I think like Alien and Aliens especially were just like much better movies overall than, say, the original Predator movie, which I love. One of my favorites as a kid. Don't get me wrong. But, you know, Predator is very much just like a straight action movie. It has a very simple story. It's not like super ambitious narratively, but what it does do is deliver solidly in terms of the action that it wants to focus on. So excellent in that sense. But, you know, Alien and Aliens were just more ambitious and did so, and were ambitious successfully. So I kind of have to recognize that as being like the bigger achievements, basically, cinematically speaking, and in terms of storytelling. Now, once you get into the sequels, things kind of change a little bit. You know, Predator 2 was okay. You know, I liked it, but I was a kid when I saw it, so like I'm biased, right? Didn't really care for like the AVP movies. Those almost don't even really count. That's basically like big budget fan fiction to me. But then you get to Predators, right? Have you ever seen that?
Predators plural?
Yeah, that was a sequel made in 2011, I want to say. 2010 maybe.
I don't know if I've seen that one.
Okay, I would recommend it. It's not great. It's not as good as the original, but it's better than Predator 2. So it's a decent entry in the franchise. Again, it's the first decent entry in the franchise since the second movie. And then I did see The Predator, which was the next sequel in the franchise, and that was a disaster. I would only recommend that if you want to laugh at it, because there were a bunch of production problems, and it shows. It really shows. That is like a sci-fi B monster movie that somehow evolved into a Predator movie. It's very bizarre. And then I think the latest one was Prey, which I actually haven't seen, but I'm looking forward to it because it's been very well reviewed.
Is that the one that has all the different animals that the Predator fights?
I don't think so. That's the one that takes place in like the 1700s and focuses on Native Americans.
Oh.
Yeah. So very distinct setting, basically. So yeah, I think Predator has done better in terms of sequels, because if you look at the Alien sequels, it's kind of all over the place. Alien 3's problems are legendary. I won't get too into that, but the documentary on the making of Alien 3 is probably more interesting than the movie, let's put it like that. Alien Resurrection is very controversial. I liked it, but I also saw it in theater when I was a kid, when it came out in 97, so very biased there as well. I think it's an enjoyable, entertaining movie, but I don't think it's a good Alien movie, per se. You know, to be fair, Alien and Alien set the bar, like, really high, you know. So Resurrection was probably never going to reach that. But as far as, you know, popcorn flicks go, Resurrection's not bad. It's got its moments. And then after that, I think the AVP movies, so no comment. And then after that, there really wasn't much happening for a long time. I think, is Romulus the first Alien movie since Resurrection? I think it might be. So if so, you kind of have to give, in terms of sequels, you have to give favor to the Predator franchise. They've done a bit better in that regard overall. And again, the bar is not high, so that's not saying much. So I guess overall, I would say I like the Alien franchise better overall, but definitely like the Predator franchise and some of the independent entries thereon.
Mm-hmm.
So we did have another question here. How are the candidates planning on dealing with the interest-only commercial real estate loans that are maturing at the end of next year? I doubt they're going to do anything about it, honestly. I think they're just going to let those chips fall where they may. Have you heard about this, Neuro?
No.
All right, let me cough for a minute here. Okay, sorry. So basically, a lot of the smaller banks in the United States, especially the bigger regional banks, they focus disproportionately in terms of their business on commercial real estate loans. That's one of their specialties. The trouble is that since the pandemic, a lot of businesses have stopped using commercial real estate. You know, people are working from home or telecommuting or, you know, whatever. So the result is that the value of commercial property has actually been in decline. You know, more so in some cities than others, but, you know, in general, that's been the trend. And that's a problem for people who took out loans to buy those properties, because now they're underwater, right? The properties in many cases are now worth less than the loans they took out for them. Which means if they ever actually wanted to sell the property, then they would not be able to make their money back. So that means there's an incentive to just walk away or declare bankruptcy or what have you, which is not a great position to be in for them, but it's an even worse position for the banks, because that means that they're not getting their money back. So what's expected is that there's eventually going to be a wave of defaults amongst people who had bought commercial real estate property, and that wave of defaults is going to hobble regional banks in the United States. And the fear is that this could create a chain reaction, because if regional banks start having big problems, that could have a contagious effect, right? You know, they have this term contagion in the financial sector. So one, it could be that if banks actually start themselves going out of business, that could have an effect on larger banks that have invested in them or made loans to them. And so those larger banks could themselves then be hobbled. But the bigger effect could actually be one in terms of sentiment. You know, if people see regional banks struggling, they may be less likely to try to ask for loans. You know, they may reserve they may have more reserved business plans that delay decisions into the future, which could have an overarching effect on the overall economy, right? That slows it down. Also, the regional banks themselves could be less likely to make loans, and while they are disproportionately focused on commercial lending, commercial real estate rather, they also do business loans, particularly for, you know, regional firms or smaller firms. So, you know, if they're less likely to make loans or they charge higher interest for those loans that they do make, that also is going to have a break. You know, that's also going to have a negative effect on economic growth in the broader economy. So basically, the fear then is that this wave of potential defaults that's pending could have, you know, potentially severe effects on the overall economy. That said, I don't really think it's as big a deal as people make it out to be. For one, the whole Federal Reserve System was specifically created to contain the type of contagion that people are worried about. And as we saw with the whole kerfuffle, you know, earlier this year, I think it was, they can contain that. You know, if there's a run on a big regional bank, they can deal with that. You know, they're prepared for that. Their toolkit is specifically designed for that, so that should be fine. So I'm not worried about that. A potential slowdown in lending to small to medium-sized businesses by regional banks, that's a bigger problem, but I think the impact will be muted if the overall stability of regional banks is secured, such that the broader public has confidence in them. And again, that's in the Federal Reserve's wheelhouse. That's almost literally why they exist. So I think they can take what actions are going to be necessary in order to ensure that banks don't go under, or if they do go under, it's in a very organized, slow, processed way that does not hobble the confidence of major economic actors in the rest of the economy, such that you do see this loss in sentiment that results in less lending and less economic activity. And also, people have been predicting this sort of wave of defaults in the commercial property sector for several years now, and it keeps not happening. So I'm a little dubious on that count as well. I think probably commercial real estate owners will probably bear the brunt of it, but I think the banks will probably be okay. They'll take a hit for sure, but they're supposed to be ready for that. I'm sure there are some banks that had riskier business models that are going to maybe go under. They'll be in more financial stress than some of the more conservative ones. But I don't think there's enough of a major problem. I don't think that's going to be a problem with enough regional banks to completely undermine the overall health of the financial sector. So, yes, it's a problem, and yes, it's a problem that not enough people have really talked about. Probably most people aren't even really aware that this commercial real estate problem is an issue. But I also think among the people that have been talking about it, they're kind of overestimating how bad it's going to be when it finally does kind of start really hitting, in terms of defaults. I'm sure the defaults are going to come sooner or later. Right, the pandemic was too big and impactful for there not to be significant waves there. But we have institutions that can deal with those waves, and the economic actors themselves involved are probably taking whatever steps that they can conjure to try to deal with it. So overall, I think the effect will be mild, relatively speaking. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. The Bangladeshi government went out of its way to prove me wrong. So, this could be another example. But for now, this is my perspective on it. I don't think it's too big a deal, or that it will be. Oh.
Someone says this gentleman has the voice of Saruman? What?
Yeah, the cough probably doesn't help.
I don't really get that at all. You don't really have a British accent.
Yeah, it's probably more the raspiness. Sometimes I have trouble getting the words out. Throat kind of tightens up, so it kind of comes out wrong.
Yeah, you're getting better from being sick. Won't make you go for too long.
Well, it always takes me a long time to get over colds and stuff, so it doesn't surprise me that COVID's no different. And I would point out again, I'm pretty much over it. It's just the cough. The cough always lasts forever. I'll feel totally fine, but I'll still be coughing my guts out for like a month.
Yeah, I think it's mainly just that your body knows that you've been through some stuff, so it's like, make extra mucus to be safe.
Well, what other drama did we have?
I don't know. I had a nice trip here in LA. We drove out to Malibu. Got to see a nice trail and things. Yeah. It's a good outing. Got a little toasty sunburn.
Oh.
Be okay.
That sounds painful.
Yeah, not too bad. We did have sunscreen on, but we should have reapplied at a certain point, which we did not. So.
Yeah, that's how it gets you.
You'll live and learn.
I could have sworn I had a correction from last week. I don't see it. Well, somebody last week did ask about the fight in Turkey's parliament. And I hadn't heard of it, so I didn't have anything to say about it. So I did go back and try to look into it.
Yeah, that was like a fist fight?
Huh? Sorry, what?
A fist fight? It was a physical altercation?
Yeah, physical altercation. So what happened is that there was an opposition minister of parliament who was giving a speech. And what he did was he called for one of his colleagues to be admitted to the assembly because his colleague in question had been duly elected as a minister of parliament. but he did so after being arrested for allegedly helping organize the Gezi Park protests back in 2013. Those were some big protests in Istanbul back in 2013 over a government plan to build a replica Ottoman barracks, if I remember correctly, on what was then a public park, specifically Gezi Park. So a lot of people that don't like the AKP were very upset about that. Besides the fact that they were destroying a park, they were destroying a public park to replace it with what was perceived as a kind of, how should I put it, a monument to the Ottoman Empire, which was seen as a very non-secular sort of thing to do. If you're familiar with Turkish politics, a lot of it centers around secular nationalists versus more socially conservative, pseudo-Islamist conservatives. And so the secular nationalists in Turkey, both of the left and right-wing bent, didn't like that the AKP wanted to do that, so there were big protests. So one of the lead guys involved in that was arrested, subsequently elected to parliament, but he was not allowed to take his seat because parliament stripped him of his seat. However, on August the 1st, Turkey's constitutional court declared that his exclusion was quote-unquote null and void. But he still wasn't allowed into parliament, so one of his buddies in the same party, I think the Workers' Party of Turkey is what it was, got up on the podium and started giving a speech about how his friend, fellow party member at least, needed to be admitted into parliament. So that was sort of the gist of it. It made it kind of sound like he was attacked because he was calling for this guy to be allowed back into parliament. But when I actually read the story, I noted that there was kind of more to his speech, and I think it was sort of the later things he said that probably caused the fight. The specific quote I have here is as follows. We're not surprised that you call Can Adelaide, the guy in question, a terrorist, just as you do everyone who does not side with you. But the biggest terrorists are the ones sitting in these seats, end quote.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I think that probably is what started the fight. Yeah, apparently a bunch of AKP ministers of parliament rushed to the podium to punch him, according to the article, while he was still at the lectern, and then dozens more joined the melee on both sides.
Damn it, I thought we had exciting politics.
Yeah, not quite that bad. At least not anymore, anyway. I'm pretty sure we had some similar stuff back in the 1800s. Have you ever heard the story of Charles Sumner?
No.
Yeah, he was and chat probably knows exactly what I'm talking about. Some of you do, and I might get the details wrong here, so I welcome you guys to keep me honest on this. But as I recall, Sumner was a Massachusetts senator, and he was anti-slavery. So I think in the 1850s, I want to say, he gave a big speech lambasting slavery, lambasting senators from the South who were trying to propagate slavery, demanded that it be ended, and it was a whole big dramatic speech that made national headlines. And what happened is that a Southern senator, who heard it was ripshit pissed about it, and so went to his office in the Capitol building and then just beat the shit out of him with his walking stick.
Wow.
And when I say beat the shit out of him, I don't mean like it was a fight. I mean like he actually disabled him. Like he did real damage to this guy. Okay. And it turned into like a big national scandal.
Huh.
So yeah, American politics has had its fair share of kerfuffles over time. In so much as we don't see kerfuffles anymore, it's not because we're more civilized, it's because we had to pass a bunch of rules to try to make it less likely to happen.
Pretty interesting. We definitely had our violent phase too then.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we had a bunch of little stories in different parts of the world, but nothing that kind of blew out. Let's see. And we talked about that. Did you see Narendra Modi visiting Ukraine?
No.
Yeah. He went there because he wants to help negotiate a peace agreement, but then, like, nothing happened, which is exactly what happened when he went to Russia recently. He actually went to visit Vladimir Putin in Moscow. And, they made a bunch of noise about negotiating peace, and then nothing came of it, and then Modi left. So basically the same thing has now happened in Kiev. So he met Zelensky. They talked about Russia. They talked about peace. They looked at a monument. Well, not a monument, but a memorial to the civilian dead from the war. They hugged each other, and then that was about it. It's a lot of photo ops, not a lot of substance. I suspect Modi is doing it more for domestic political consumption in India. I don't think he really gives a shit about the war in Ukraine. I think rather he just wants to take it as an opportunity to present himself as a guru who wants and fights for peace in the world without actually, putting anything on the line or otherwise doing anything of substance. Posturing, basically. More of that.
Posturing is strong and cheap.
Yeah, the cheap talk of politics is what it comes down to. There's a bunch of people that got murdered in Germany. Did you hear about that?
No. Why were they murdered?
Let's see. It was a Syrian immigrant affiliated with the Islamic State. He went to a festival in Germany and he just stabbed a bunch of people.
Damn.
Yeah, he actually got away at first, and they had to track him down. Well, actually, not even really track him down. He actually turned himself in, I think, a day or two later. I think that's what it was. It's not necessarily that noteworthy a story in the grand scheme of things, because this has happened a couple of times now. So it's not necessarily that unusual. And, I would point out to any Europeans listening to keep in mind that here in the United States, random acts of violence are just normal. Like, if you don't believe me, you can check out the local news for Dallas, Texas, where I live. And I assure you that on any given weekend, there's going to be an item in the local news about somebody getting shot to death. Probably gang-related. That's what it is, like 9 times out of 10, but it always happens. Like, they're very consistent. Say what you will about gang members, but they're very consistent about one thing: murdering each other. Always a steady drumbeat. So, on the one hand, I recognize that the violence in Germany is a tragedy, but at the same time, like, it's happened enough times that doesn't really surprise me. But the reason I bring it up is that this is almost certainly going to be a big thing on the far right of Germany's politics. Immigration, and in particular terrorism, as it relates to immigration, is a big talking point for the far right. And I don't doubt that they're going to make lots of hay out of this particular case. Because given what we know thus far about the case, like, this is exactly the kind of thing that they say is going to happen if you allow more immigration, or maybe even don't deport people who have already immigrated into Germany. It's a whole debate. I don't think the far right is winning it. Probably there's people listening right now that are on the opposite end of that. But it is a debate that's been ongoing. And given that this is exactly what they claim to be worried about, this is something that's probably going to be in the German news for a while. Oh yeah, when was the last time you heard about Libya?
Gaddafi.
Gaddafi?
No, Arab Spring.
Been a while.
Yeah.
Well, there was the whole civil war that happened afterwards, and the civil war is basically a frozen conflict now. They still occasionally fight, but it's not like it used to be. It's more skirmishing now more than anything. And a lot of the time, not even that. But the latest drama out of Libya was that the head of the central bank was kidnapped. And this happened after some of his rivals tried to unseat him. They tried to get him removed from the post, and apparently, having failed at that, they tried more direct methods. There's apparently been a lot of jockeying amongst factions within the Western government in Libya. I don't know how many people listening have been following Libya for the past 10-some years, but basically after the I should say after the war that ousted Gaddafi, control of the country basically was split in two. There's one government that controls the eastern half of the country, which is centered in Benghazi and is led by a general who is basically dictator of that particular area of Libya. And then in the western half of the country, it's controlled by the internationally recognized government, which is based in Tripoli. And most of that government is controlled by various militias that fought the Gaddafi regime back in 2011, specifically local militias in the western part of Libya. And while they all oppose the eastern government based in Benghazi, they don't particularly get along with each other either. They frequently jockey with each other, generally over things like positions in government, but also over things like smuggling routes, organized criminal sources of revenue, so to speak. There's lots of ways to make money when the state collapses, and various militias will generally fight over that. You can see the cartels in Mexico for a kind of milder example of that. So they've kind of fought with each other intermittently over the past 10 years since the Gaddafi regime fell. And apparently the kidnapping of the head of the central bank is the latest iteration of that conflict. Some guys wanted their guy to be head of the central bank. They couldn't get the guy that was sitting out, so now they've tried to just forcibly remove him so that they could get their preferred candidate. So now all the militias are mobilizing, and it's looking like there could be a more violent kerfuffle over it, but that remains to be seen. So you could be hearing about Libya more in the news before too long. Although given how little coverage it's gotten over the past couple of years, I'm a little skeptical. Even if they do start killing again, it may not be enough to get the world's attention.
Yeah, it's a different situation. Instead of advocating for someone to not be reelected, you just kidnap instead.
Yeah. Protests in Indonesia. Have you heard about that at all?
Nope.
So that one is kind of interesting from a political perspective. What happened is that there had been a rule in Indonesia that if you wanted to run for national office, like for a position in parliament specifically, then your party had to already have at least 20% of the seats in their regional assembly. Because each province of Indonesia kind of has their own assembly, right? So those parties running for office there had to have at least 20% of those seats before they could even think about running for national office. Now, obviously, that's a really high number, right? In developed countries, for example, that have parliamentary systems, generally the threshold is much lower. I think like 10% is the higher boundary. Like if you can get at least 10% of the vote nationwide, then you can get into parliament. But here, not only is like the percentage higher, it actually has to be in a regional parliament first. So if you have no presence at all in a regional parliament anywhere, you can't even run for national office. Like you have to establish yourself regionally first, and only then can you run for national office. So this is a major barrier to entry if you're a smaller party, right? It's going to take you probably years in order to even become legally viable to run for national office. And given how establishment parties are about, new entrants, like it's probably going to be extremely difficult to get that 20% in the first place. So there's been a constitutional court. There was a constitutional court ruling in Indonesia that overturned that rule. And the government did not like that. The government moved immediately to pass a new law that would reestablish that rule. They ended up having to delay the vote, but the only reason it was delayed was because they didn't have a quorum. So it seems likely that they'll do that, but in the meantime, big protests have broken out, specifically in the major cities of Indonesia. So a lot of people, especially urbanites, who tend to be more liberal in outlook anyway, classical liberal, keep in mind, they don't like this. They didn't like the rule in the first place, and they especially don't like that the government is trying to maintain it. So there's been some fireworks as a result. I don't know if it'll go anywhere. I haven't heard anything recently about the protests, so I don't even know if they're ongoing. But there was, for a while, some tension there. But I thought it was an interesting story just because of that rule. That's an example of how establishment political interest will try to make it as difficult as possible for new challengers to enter the field and potentially upset their control.
Yeah, tipping the system in one's favor. A viable tactic, but considered a dirty one a lot of times.
There's a big rail strike in Canada. Did you see that?
No, it's the people who work the rail jobs.
Yeah, the unions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think just one union, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the strike has shut down the two largest rail carriers in Canada. And it was looking like it could be very disruptive, since the United States imports a lot of stuff from Canada. So, it had the potential to be impactful there, and that might have hurt inflation, which is already a major issue in U.S. politics. But as was, the Canadian government has since passed back-to-work legislation, which effectively just forces the workers to go back to work. The government is still going to mediate negotiations, so it's not as though management is going to get its way. Basically, they're just going to enter a new phase of negotiations where the strikes have been effectively stopped temporarily for the moment.
We're protesting. No, you're not. Back to work. Okay. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's not unusual for governments to do that if strikes are prolonged, or, even if they're not prolonged, maybe the strikes are just especially disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
So governments do reserve the right to kind of step in and try to deal with that. Because obviously, if everybody in the country is being affected in a negative way, that augurs poorly for the government's popularity. And it's also a little bit unfair for just one group of people to just kind of ruin it for everybody, so to speak. I'm sure the unions would argue otherwise. I'm sure the union would argue hey, this is just leverage for us. And if management were playing fair, they would recognize that and make concessions rather than trying to play hardball and force us into a position where we have to do this. So, fair point. Make of it what you will. But regardless, governments don't really tolerate too much disruption for too long. And so the Canadian government here has stepped in. I'm sure the Trudeau government didn't want to do it, because keep in mind, this is an election year for Canada, and Trudeau is not doing especially well in polls, last I checked. Maybe things have changed, but it's a closer election than I'm sure Trudeau would be comfortable with. And so the result then is that being faced with the prospect of cracking down on a major constituency like labor unions was probably a pretty tough choice for him. But he has to also consider the rest of the country. If one of your constituents is making life hard for your other constituents, then you have to make a judgment call based off of who you alienate is going to hurt your re-election campaign the least. So ultimately, the judgment was made that it would be better to crack down on the unions than to do nothing and kind of let them have their way and go through with the strike. We'll see what kind of electoral consequences that has. If he's lucky, he won't piss them off too much. I think there's still some time to go before it happens. I don't know the exact date of the election. Maybe somebody in chat does. If it's far enough away, then people will probably just forget. So no damage done.
Our attention span is rapidly decreasing.
Yeah, the public's attention span is short in the best of times. Well, let's see. We did have some Israel stuff to kind of go through. I don't know how excited you are about that.
Chat's been relatively okay about it recently.
Well, that's something.
Yeah, good job, Chat.
There's not really anything new to talk about. A lot of the stories that I just mentioned are stuff that I would not normally not even mention. I just thought it would be good to kind of cover other parts of the world. Normally we talk United States, Israel, maybe Ukraine, and then maybe whatever big item happens, say the government in Bangladesh being overthrown. But we don't always cover the little stories that happen in other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. So I figured I'd kind of go through some of them. But yeah, Israel is still fighting in Gaza, obviously. The United States government is still mad at them because they won't fucking listen to them. Washington would really prefer this not be a thing in an election year. If it were not an election year, they would probably just ignore it. But as is, they kind of can't do that. So they've been pressuring the Israeli government to try to wrap up the conflict and reach some kind of ceasefire deal. The Israeli government is not super thrilled about that, Netanyahu in particular, so they've been pretending to go along with U.S. plans for mediation and peace talks and whatnot. But they've also kind of gone out of their way to stymie those talks. Like, it's pretty clear that they have no real intention of wrapping up the conflict anytime soon. The Israeli government right now, and again, specifically the Netanyahu administration, is very much focused on something in Gaza. Like, I'm still not entirely clear what the game plan is. They say they want to destroy Hamas, which is not a realistic goal. I think some of the Israelis in chat mentioned that the goal was really more to degrade Hamas to the point where it's no longer a threat. And that makes more sense, but it's also not really a clear-cut victory condition, because, how do you measure the degree to which Hamas has been destroyed? And if the measurement is ambiguous, then how can you ever be confident enough to leave? That's kind of the traditional counterinsurgency campaign problem that governments have faced in situations like this. They may have this notion of a imagined endpoint that they want to reach before they leave, but generally the situation on the ground is too ambiguous for that desired end game to ever be clearly achieved, which means that the conflict is interminable and just kind of drags out. So I'm not really sure what he thinks the objective is, but at the very least, he seems to want to keep the thing going, because they're definitely not interested in peace talks. The Israeli government actually recently did the same thing Hamas did a couple months ago, which is that the Israeli government announced that it had agreed to a peace deal. And everybody was very excited. And then it came out that while Israel had agreed to that, Hamas didn't know anything about it and totally rejected it. So, more games, basically. These are all negotiating tactics and, just sort of smoke and mirrors type bullshit. Made all the worse by the fact that neither party involved really wants an actual ceasefire. So, everybody's kind of engaging in peace kabuki theater, with the actual desired policy being to maintain the status quo, which is more fighting. I did note that one of the major sticking points in negotiations at this point is that Israel, and again, this is the Netanyahu administration, wants to maintain troops within Gaza, specifically along the Egyptian border, and then also at a position in the middle of Gaza that would allow them to maintain checkpoints through which they could kind of check people moving from one part of Gaza to the other. So that apparently is now one of their major preconditions. But I would also note that there's apparently a lot of discord within the Israeli government over this. Specifically, the Netanyahu administration's leadership is at odds with the actual people negotiating the peace agreement, or I guess I should say ceasefire. That's more what they're going for. And then the Netanyahu administration leadership is also at odds with the military leadership. So, the military and the ceasefire negotiators are apparently more interested in the hostages rather than, destroying, quote unquote, Hamas. And the Netanyahu administration kind of thinks they're weak and has been criticizing them pretty openly, especially the military, which it points out is technically responsible for allowing the October attack to happen in the first place. So there's a considerable amount of institutional bad blood right now within major actors in Israeli politics and even within the Israeli administration. And in general, I'm inclined to just assume Netanyahu will get his way, just because that's what always fucking happens in Israel. For the past 20 years, it's very much been, the Netanyahu show over there. And he seems to be the savviest political operator as well. So, that also kind of makes me think and assume that he's going to end up on top after all this. It's worth pointing out that while everybody had been assuming that Netanyahu would invariably lose office as a result of the October attack, his polling has actually gotten better over the past couple months. It had been down in the dumps, but it's actually starting to recover. And that especially is a bad sign, because that means Netanyahu has even less reason to go easier in Gaza. If the war was a disaster for his popularity, dragging it out and potentially pretending to win it anyway, or at least fighting to win it, could be what recovers all of that lost popularity that was incurred last October. And it seems to be working. If that is the plan, it seems to be progressing. And that means that there's basically zero chance of there being any substantive progress in ceasefire talks going forward. Let's see. There was a leaked letter. I thought this kind of speaks to the degree of animosity between institutional actors. There was a letter written by the head of Shin Bet, which is Israel's main intelligence agency, to the defense minister. And this guy, the head of the Shin Bet, claims that the national security minister, a guy named Ben Gvir, if you've been following Israeli politics for the past year or two, you've definitely heard of Ben Gvir. He's a far-right politician whose party is in coalition with Netanyahu and is basically one of, if not the main reason, Netanyahu has been able to stay in power. He's also somewhat antagonistic with Netanyahu because he thinks Netanyahu has not gone far enough in propagating settlements in Palestinian territory. Basically, he wants to go harder than what Israel has been going with regard to the Palestinian issue. And he's been doing stupid shit like people might always do. Specifically, he visited the Al-Aqsa Mosque recently, which is always an incendiary thing to do, right? Because, you know, Muslims assume that if Jews are going there to pray, it's because they want and believe the Al-Aqsa Mosque to be torn down so that the temple can be rebuilt. Originally, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was basically the main temple for the religion of Judaism. I forget the technical name of it. It was like the Grand Temple or something. You know, somebody in chat probably knows. But basically, there were two such temples. Both of them were destroyed, and then eventually the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built on top of the ruins. I don't think it was built on top of the actual original temple. I think technically there's like some wing of the Al-Aqsa Mosque that's over the actual temple foundation. But regardless, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is over the site, and there's a lot of rumor mongering between radicals on both sides about, you know, should the Al-Aqsa Mosque be torn down so that we can rebuild the temple? Are the Jews planning on tearing down the Al-Aqsa Mosque so they can rebuild the temple? Right. That's one of the main issues. Not the main issue, but one of the main issues that people on the far right, among both Palestinians and the Israelis, use against each other and also against more moderate members of their own societies. So one of the things people on the far right like to do in Israel is they'll actually try to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque because they know they're going to get a reaction from the Palestinians, and they can use that reaction to fire up and mobilize their own supporters, as well as some people who are maybe more moderate on the actual temple question, but who are afraid of Palestinians.
You're saying they're aggressively praying at other people's mosques to piss them off?
Yes.
Wow.
They actually took, he specifically in this case, Ben Gvir took a group of fellow members of his party, and they actually just walked into the mosque, which is against the rules. They're not supposed to do that. They walked into the mosque grounds and prayed. Huh. And so it became a whole thing. You know, that, again, that's a very incendiary thing to do. Ariel Sharon actually did something very similar back in the 90s in an effort to try to sabotage peace talks between the then Labor government of Israel and, what's his name? The head of the PLO at the time, Yasser Arafat. There we go. So, you know, anytime you want to fuck things up between Israelis and Palestinians, an easy way to do it is to just, you know, be Jewish and go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's always going to make the news. So Ben Gvir did that, and so the head of the Israeli intelligence wrote to the defense minister, and in the letter he said that this would lead to bloodshed. Like, what he's doing is, like, very negative for the national interest. He also accused certain parliamentarians of directly and indirectly supporting extremist settlers, and in his words, they're, quote, providing money, legitimacy, and praise, end quote. Ben Gvir, for his part, responded to this leaked letter by, again, like Netanyahu has done, highlighting security failures that led to Hamas's October attack. So basically more finger pointing. Let's see, yesterday, I should say this morning, technically, there was an exchange of fire between the Israelis and Hezbollah. You know, Hezbollah has been saying that they're going to get revenge on Israel for about a month now because Israel assassinated one of their senior commanders in Beirut. And, you know, they kept saying, we're going to do something, and then they didn't do it, and it wasn't entirely clear if anything would happen. But then this morning they fired, I think, several hundred rockets and drones into Israel. And Israel apparently found out they were going to do that and launched some preemptive airstrikes. And of course, while it was happening, they also launched airstrikes. So there was an exchange of fire there. Hezbollah, after they stopped firing, said that this was only the first phase of their retaliation. But then there was a diplomat who talked to a news agent, I think for the BBC, and they said that they had been in contact with representatives of both the Palestinians, well, no, not the Palestinians, with Hezbollah and the Israeli government. And they both basically said that they didn't want to escalate further and that the exchange was done. It's finished. So yet another example of just theatrical violence done for signaling purposes.
Mm-hmm.
As it happens, damage was pretty light on both sides. I think 3 people died in Lebanon and then 1 died in Israel. So relatively light casualties, relatively little damage done. Again, this is just what posturing looks like when both sides are being very violent and they're
To maintain
signaling.
my honor and our appearances, I must now attack you for attacking me.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. So that's the Israel update. Again, like I said, not much has really fundamentally changed. It's kind of just status quo for the most part. Yeah, something's going to have to change within the balance of Israeli politics, I think, for there to be any change in the direction of the war, one way or the other. And for now, that seems a ways off. Netanyahu still feels besieged, and he probably wants to wait until his polling significantly improves. Again, it's already started to, so that seems to be working, but it's going to have to improve further before he's confident enough to really change tack as far as the conflict. And he may not even change tack, even if his polling improves significantly, until the next election, which I think is coming up. So we may have to wait until then to see anything happen. And it could be that we just
didn't get over 100% of the vote.
I'm sure he would like to, but I don't think so. Yeah, we could end up with another hung parliament. Israel's has had several of those now, effectively, in successive elections. So we may be on track for another one of those, but I'm sure Netanyahu is going to lobby really hard to try to represent himself as the guy who saved the country in the wake of the October attack, and not the guy who was responsible for it. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that works remains to be seen. That is a work in progress, so to speak.
Yeah, because he was in power for both, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I had that book about Israeli history that I was reading. Mm-hmm. Kind of haven't picked it up in a while, but one of the things I do remember is that the original leader, the first prime minister of independent Israel in the 1940s, was actually pretty much the same guy that had been leading it before it became independent. I forget his name. Ben-Gurion, that's what it was. He actually stayed in power for a very long time, too. And even when he was out of power, he actually maintained a lot of influence and ended up coming back into power after he nominally left. And everybody thought he was just like a big statesman. He thought, they thought he was just like a really good, solid leader. But it came out later. This was revealed in some of his personal correspondence. He actually did not think Israel would survive after he left. Like, he assumed that when he stepped down and then actually died and just was not involved in Israeli politics anymore, he didn't think Israel could survive without him. So while he did kind of play an important role in Israeli politics and history early in the country's history, that said, he didn't really think too much of the country itself. He was much more about himself. He had a big ego, basically. And he thought the country basically was doomed, effectively. So I think Netanyahu kind of has a similar mindset. I think he genuinely thinks that the country can't survive without him. Again, that doesn't really say much for what he thinks about the country itself, but that's just how some guys are. Maybe that helps him achieve more or whatever, make of it what you will. I'm sure his supporters spin it any which way. But I kind of detect a similar hubris in his style, in his rhetoric, in his governance. He really seems to think that he in particular, and not his party or not any other individuals or not any movement or set of ideals or policies, is sufficient to protect Israel. I think he seems to believe that he in particular is the necessary variable in order to ensure the country's security. And some people say that's not the case. I've heard some people say that he pretends to be like that, but really it's just part of his strongman image, that it's all just an act in order to try to kind of impress people who want a strong leader. But I'm not entirely sure about that anymore. I kind of used to think that. I used to think that, politics is like mostly acting, especially when it comes to appearing before the public. But at the same time, the more I've seen Netanyahu and the more I've seen how he clings to power, the impression that I get is of a guy who doesn't just want to rule Israel, but thinks that it's necessary. When people get into power and they kind of get a taste for it, that's often how they try to justify their hanging on to power. It's not just having a big ego. It's about tying that ego into the very nation's identity. So, in other words, he's the kind of guy who says we when he talks about, well, I shouldn't say we, I should say he says I when he talks about his country. Because for him, his country and himself and his leadership are the same thing.
Chat saying Netanyahu needs to stay in office, otherwise he's going to have to actually face his corruption charges.
Yeah, there's always that, but I don't think that's the main motivator. I mean, it's not like the guy couldn't just leave the country, right? If all he's concerned about is corruption charges and whatnot, there's easier ways to get around that. He doesn't need to be a drama llama if that's all he's worried about. But instead, he's engaged in a great deal of effort in order to try to stay in Israel as the leader. And he's been willing to do just about anything to make it happen. So I don't think it's just about the corruption charges. I think there is a large part of it is ego, in my opinion, and then the other part is that he genuinely thinks the country needs him. I think he's convinced himself of that.
The people need me in these dire times. Basically that. Was there any update on Ukraine?
I don't think I had anything.
Cool.
The Russians are pushing on a town called Pravkarov. Something like, I'm butchering the pronunciation, I'm sure. But yeah, the progress has been slow and incremental. It's basically just the latest town that they have taken. They don't take a whole lot of towns, but they do take them pretty consistently, maybe like once every month or two. There's also lots of like little villages that they take more frequently, but those don't really matter strategically. Prokhorov has been in the news more because it's kind of a transportation node, right? There's a kind of confluence of highways that are there, so it's relatively more important to Ukraine's logistics. But I don't know that losing it is going to be a body blow either, any more than losing any of the other towns that they've lost over the past couple months has been. So more of the same there in Donbass. The offensive in Kursk is ongoing. Not a lot of change there. The Ukrainians have been blowing up bridges to try to hobble the logistics of the Russian units operating there. That seems to be having some effect. But I would point out, too, that if they want to continue expanding, then those bridges are going to end up being a problem for them rather than the Russians, because that's going to hobble their logistics in turn. But I assume that they're not that interested then in expanding beyond those bridges. So probably that suggests that the scope of their ambition in Kursk is limited. They're not going to keep pushing forever. I think eventually they'll reach a stopping point on their own, of their own accord. But yeah, that's about it. The Modi thing was the only other item that I had as far as Ukraine, and we already went over that. Not a lot to report there.
Well, cool. We can swap over to BG3 whenever. We just got a raid from Baomo. Thank you all for being here. Welcome. Doing some will discussion. We talked about the American election, the options that are before us, and the different strategies of the candidates that we have to choose from. Visited a lot of different smaller stories, but mostly a status quo week. Nothing really super major that the world is fussing about.
Yeah, not this week.
That's good in a sense.
I mean, the baseline is more dramatic than it was even just a couple years ago. So, it's not like there's nothing to talk about. It's just, there's nothing to talk about that we haven't already talked about quite a bit over the past couple years.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for weighing in on this discussion. Fuzzy Core, thank you for handling questions, and Agent Smith for your expertise. As a reminder, if we messed anything up during the segment, please give us a scathing review in the YouTube comments. And we will see you on the next episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Yep. Thanks again. Always a privilege. Talk to you next time.
GG.